Welcome to Rotary Vise Techniques Part 5. I'm Raj Kletke and we'll start with ribbing. As you can see, I've put in 3 peacock herls as the body material and ribbing on the near side. I like the first wrap of material to go under the hook. I think it gives a neater look to the fly. So the body material I'm forward wrapping and it would be on the far side of the hook. The rib I'll be reverse wrapping, so it will be on the near side of the hook. First I'll tie in the body materials, so I get my thread and my body materials at the same tie-in point. In this case I'll use the parallel or together method and wind the body fibers onto the hook shank. Once I get to my tie-off point, I would usually not only tie it off, but put in an extra 5 or 6 wraps that I'll show you later, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to tie the body material off, clip it, make sure that I am now where I want to tie off my rib also, and then, as I said, put in 5 or 6 extra wraps. This allows me to reverse wrap my rib, rotating the vise in the opposite direction that you would normally use it. This means that when I get to my tie-off point for my rib, my thread will have also unwound to the same position, and now I can tie off the ribbing in the usual fashion. Once it's tied off, the ribbing can be clipped and you can continue with the rest of the fly. We'll review some of the techniques we learned by tying a flashback pheasant tail nymph. This hook is larger than I normally tie, but serves well for video purposes. The first step is usually to tie in thread. You'll note that I left some bare shank at the eye of the hook for a distribution wrap and to remind me not to crowd the eye of the hook. I then keep tension in the tail of the thread at approximately 45 degrees to wrap a nice smooth base. When I get near the end, I snap the thread off forward, parallel to the hook shank, and then put a few more wraps of thread in to get to the tail tie-in point. By moving the fibers on the pheasant tail 90 degrees from the stem, you can align the tail fibers before cutting them off. I am using a much larger bundle than I would normally use, again for video purposes. After measuring for proper length, I put the tail feathers and the tail tie-in point together on the near side of the hook, and using thread tension, move the materials to the top of the hook and bind them in place. At this point, you would normally cut off the excess body materials, but since I'll be using the same fibers, I simply fold them back and tie them to the far side of the hook. This saves time. The rib would go on next, and I use a fine copper wire rib. As with practically all of my ribbing, I tie it on the near side of the hook because I will be reverse winding the rib. The thread is then taken to the tie-in point, and then getting the starting of the thread and the starting of the body fibers at the same position by using my rotating vise, I can use the together or parallel method to wind the body fibers forward to where I want to tie off the abdomen. You'll note that I again use the rotary vise for positioning so that I can clip materials off above the hook shank. The thread is now where I want to tie off my rib, but I'll add an extra 5 or 6 wraps. I could have done this before cutting off the body material. When I reverse wind the rib, the thread also unwinds until they're at the correct tie-off point for the rib. Some people would wrap extra copper wire underneath the thorax. I commonly do this also for extra weight, but for this video I'm not doing that. I break off my ribs so as not to use my scissors, which would dull them. The next step is to add the Flashaboo as the wing case. I commonly keep the Flashaboo together with masking tape. Once I square up the ends and give my thread a slight counterclockwise twist so that any kick is towards my fingers and therefore the thread is under good control, I'll tie in the Flashaboo, pull it into position, and then bind it down. The excess Flashaboo is usually then put in the material clip to keep it out of the way while I tie in the peacock herl, which I use for the thorax. After squaring the ends of the peacock herl and being sure the thread is under control, I tie that in and then put the start of the thread and the start of the peacock herl together using the Rotary Vise. Since I'll be using the chenille technique, I wrap only a few times around the thread because I'm going to be wrapping only a few times around the hook shank, and I want the thread free for tie-in purposes. The peacock herl is then tied off, and the excess peacock herl is clipped again above the shank. The Flashaboo is then bent forward to provide the wing case. Again, positioning is important. Be sure not to crowd the eye of the hook. Once the Flashaboo is bound into place, it also can be cut off above the hook, and now I'm ready to add the legs. To add the legs, get your pheasant tail fibers so the ends are even. You can either use a split bundle or a more vertical bundle. Measure for length and pinch the fibers tightly to the far side of the hook. Use your thread tension to distribute the fibers, and then check for distribution and length. Once you're comfortable with the positioning, tie an extra loop around and break off the fibers. You can then finish the head. Once the head is finished, you can either end the fly with half hitches, a whip finish, your preference. I happen to like using the whip finish tool. In this case, I'm only whip finishing it one time, although commonly I will use 2 whip finishes before cutting off the thread. You then have your finished flashback pheasant tail nymph. In the next video, Rotary Vise Techniques Part 6, we'll be winding hackles, adding dry fly wings, and tying one of my favorite dry fly patterns. See you soon.